After 70, your body sends signals most doctors won't fully explain. There's one risk that quietly grows with each passing year, often unnoticed until it's already changing your life. What you don't know could determine how independently you live tomorrow. Most of us expect aging to arrive slowly. We imagine it as a gentle slope, a little less energy here, a few more aches there, and for many years, that's exactly how it feels. But after 70, something shifts, not all at once, not with fanfare, but the body begins crossing thresholds that don't announce themselves. You wake up one day and realize you're not quite as steady as you were 6 months ago. You reach for a word, and it doesn't come as quickly. You stand from a chair and feel a hesitation you didn't feel before. These moments are easy to dismiss. You tell yourself it's normal. You tell yourself everyone your age feels this way. And in some sense, you're right. But what most people don't realize is that after 70, the body doesn't just age. It accelerates in specific ways. Certain systems begin to weaken faster. Certain risks begin to compound. And the healthcare system, for all its advancements, rarely pauses to explain this in plain terms. When you visit your doctor, the appointment is often brief. Blood pressure checked, medications reviewed, maybe a few questions about how you're feeling. But the deeper shifts, the ones happening beneath the surface, are assumed to be understood. Your doctor may mention balance. They may suggest you be careful on stairs, but they rarely sit down and say, after 70, your risk of falling doesn't just increase a little, it doubles. And with it, your risk of fracture, hospitalization, and losing the independence you've spent a lifetime building. This isn't about fear, it's about clarity. Because the truth is, many of the risks that emerge after 70 are preventable. But prevention requires awareness, and awareness requires someone to tell you what's actually happening inside your body. Not in medical jargon, but in terms that make sense. Terms that help you see the connection between a momentary stumble and a much larger pattern. The healthcare system isn't designed for this kind of conversation. Appointments are short, doctors are overworked, and there's an unspoken assumption that by 70, you've already lived long enough to know your body. But knowing your body at 50 is not the same as knowing it at 75. The rules change, the risks change. And if no one tells you that, you're left navigating a new landscape with an outdated map. So what actually shifts after 70? Why does this decade feel different from the one before it? Part of it is physical. Muscle mass declines more rapidly. Bone density decreases. Vision changes in ways that affect depth perception. Reflexes slow just enough to matter. But part of it is also systemic. Your body's ability to recover from small injuries diminishes. A twisted ankle that would have healed in days now takes weeks. A bout of dizziness that once passed without consequence now lingers, creating uncertainty in your movements. And here's what makes this so insidious. These changes don't feel dramatic. They feel like nothing. A little wobble, a brief fog, a split-second delay. So, you adapt. You hold the railing a little tighter. You avoid walking after dark. You stop reaching for things on high shelves. And slowly, without realizing it, your world becomes smaller. Not because you've lost capability, but because you've lost confidence. And confidence, after 70, is everything. The medical community knows this. But the approach is often reactive, not proactive. You're told to be careful after you fall. You're given a walker after you've already struggled. You're advised to make changes after the risk has already taken hold. But what if you knew before? What if you understood the signs before they became symptoms? What if you could see the pattern before it shaped your life? That's what this conversation is about. Not panic, not helplessness, but clarity. Because after 70, the body is still capable. It's still resilient. But it requires something different from you. It requires attention. It requires adjustment. And it requires you to stop assuming that what worked at 60 will work at 75. The invisible thresholds are real. And once you cross them, the risks don't wait for you to catch up. There's a reason doctors speak carefully about aging. They know the statistics. They know the outcomes. But they also know that fear can be paralyzing. So instead of naming the risks directly, they soften the language. They say things like, just be mindful of your surroundings, or take your time getting up. What they don't say, what they hesitate to say, is that after 70, your risk of a serious fall climbs steeply. And with it comes everything that makes aging feel fragile instead of full. Falls are not just accidents. They're not random events that happen to unlucky people. They're the culmination of a dozen small changes happening simultaneously in your body. Your inner ear, which controls balance, becomes less responsive. Your legs, which once caught you without thought, now need a fraction of a second longer to react. Your vision, which once processed depth and distance effortlessly, now misjudges the height of a curb or the edge of a rug. And your bones, which once absorbed impact, now fracture under pressure that would have left you bruised a decade ago. This is the risk health experts avoid naming outright, because once you say it, once you put it into words, it sounds terrifying. But the alternative is worse. The alternative is silence. And in that silence, people walk forward unaware. They assume their bodies will warn them before something serious happens, but that's not how it works. The warning is the fall itself, and by then, the damage is done. A hip fracture after 70 changes everything. It's not just about the bone, it's about what follows. The hospital stay, the loss of mobility, the months of recovery, the fear that sets in every time you stand, the way independence, once taken for granted, suddenly feels conditional. 1 in 3 adults over 70 falls each year, but fewer than half ever tell their doctor. They chalk it up to clumsiness. They blame the floor, the lighting, the shoes. They never stop to ask, what is my body trying to tell me? And here's the part that makes this so urgent. Falls don't just happen to people who are frail. They happen to people who feel fine, who still drive, who still garden, who still live alone and manage their own lives. The risk isn't reserved for the visibly vulnerable. It's present in everyone, and that's what makes it so dangerous. Because if you're waiting to feel old before you take it seriously, you've already waited too long. Doctors know this, researchers know this, but the conversation remains surface level. You're handed a pamphlet, you're given vague advice, and you leave the office assuming you're fine because no one told you otherwise. But fine is a relative term, and after 70, fine doesn't mean safe. It means you haven't fallen yet. This isn't about living in fear, it's about living with knowledge. Because once you understand what's actually at risk, you can do something about it. But first, you have to stop pretending the small signs don't matter. The early signs don't look like warnings. They look like minor inconveniences. A moment where you reach for the counter and realize you needed it more than you thought. A time when you stand from the couch and feel a brief sway before you steady yourself. A night when you wake to use the bathroom and feel just uncertain enough in the dark that you move slower than usual. These moments pass. You forget them. And that's exactly the problem. Because these aren't isolated incidents. They're data points. They're your body telling you that something has changed. But the message is delivered so quietly, so subtly, that it never registers as urgent. And so you continue. You adapt without realizing you're adapting. You hold on to furniture a little longer. You avoid certain shoes. You stop bending down to pick things up off the floor. And in doing so, you convince yourself nothing is wrong. But something is shifting. Your balance, which once required no thought, now requires effort. Your proprioception, the sense of where your body is in space, has dulled. You can no longer trust that your foot will land exactly where you intend it to. Your reaction time, once instantaneous, now lags just enough to matter, and your strength, particularly in your legs and core, has quietly diminished to the point where catching yourself is no longer automatic. None of this feels dramatic. That's the danger, because by the time it feels serious, it's no longer early. The near miss becomes a fall. The hesitation becomes a freeze. The momentary confusion becomes a pattern. And suddenly, the life you were living confidently, independently, feels conditional. You start planning your day around safety instead of desire. You avoid stairs. You skip evening walks. You stop visiting friends whose homes feel harder to navigate. This is how risk takes root, not through one catastrophic event, but through 100 small concessions. And the cruelest part is, you may not even notice it happening, because each individual change feels reasonable. Of course, you're being careful. Of course, you're being smart. But careful and smart are not the same as aware. And awareness is what allows you to act before the risk becomes real. The signs are there. The slight drag in your step. The need to sit down after standing for a few minutes. The way your hand automatically reaches for support even when you don't think you need it. These aren't signs of weakness. They're signs of change. And change, when acknowledged, can be met. But when ignored, it compounds. So the question isn't whether the signs are present. The question is whether you're willing to see them. When the risk finally takes hold, it doesn't announce itself kindly. It arrives in a single moment, a step misjudged, a rug that shifts, a patch of ice you didn't see. And in that moment, everything changes, not just physically, but emotionally. Because a fall, especially after 70, isn't just an injury. It's a fracture in your sense of self. You land. Maybe you break a bone. Maybe you don't. But either way, something inside you shifts. Confidence, which once carried you through your days without question, suddenly evaporates. You start second-guessing every movement. You hesitate before standing. You avoid going out alone. You stop doing things you love because the fear of falling again becomes louder than the desire to live fully. This is what happens when the risk is left unaddressed. It doesn't stay confined to one event. It spreads. It reshapes your daily life. You stop trusting your body. You stop trusting the ground beneath you, and slowly your world contracts. The walks you used to take become too risky. The errands you used to run become too uncertain. The independence you once took for granted becomes something you can no longer assume. And then there's the physical reality. A hip fracture after 70 often requires surgery, weeks in the hospital, months of physical therapy. And even with the best care, full recovery isn't guaranteed. Some people never walk the same way again. Some lose the ability to live alone. Some experience a decline so steep that one fall becomes the beginning of a much longer, harder journey. But even without a fracture, the impact is profound, because once you fall, the fear doesn't leave. It follows you. Every step feels tentative. Every room feels like a minefield. You start avoiding activities not because you can't do them, but because you're terrified of what might happen if you try. And that fear, left unchecked, becomes more limiting than any physical injury. Relationships shift, too. Family members start calling more often. They start suggesting changes you're not ready to make. They talk about grab bars, about moving, about giving up the things that make you feel like yourself. And even though their concern comes from love, it feels like loss. Because what they're really saying is, you're no longer safe on your own. And that message, whether spoken or implied, cuts deep. This is what the risk looks like when it takes hold. Not just a fall, but a cascade, a loss of trust, a narrowing of life, a quiet grief for the person you were before the ground gave way. But it doesn't have to be this way. Prevention isn't about fear, it's about foresight. And the truth is, much of what increases your risk after 70 can be addressed before it ever becomes a crisis. But prevention requires action. It requires you to acknowledge that your body has changed, and that change demands a response. Start with strength. After 70, muscle mass declines rapidly if you're not actively working to preserve it. But strength training doesn't mean lifting heavy weights at a gym. It means resistance. It means standing from a chair without using your hands. It means balancing on one foot while brushing your teeth. It means incorporating small, consistent movements that keep your legs, core, and stabilizing muscles engaged. These movements don't take long, but they make a profound difference in your ability to catch yourself when balance falters. Balance itself can be trained. Your body's ability to stay upright is not fixed. It's a skill, and like any skill, it improves with practice. Simple exercises, standing on one leg, walking heel to toe, shifting your weight from side to side, retrain your inner ear and your proprioceptive system. Done daily, even for just a few minutes, they can reduce your fall risk significantly. Then there's your environment. Most falls don't happen because of frailty. They happen because of hazards. A loose rug, a dim hallway, a cluttered floor, a slippery bathroom. These are things you can change. Walk through your home with honest eyes. Remove the rugs that slide. Add lighting to every stairway and hallway. Install grab bars in the bathroom. Clear the paths you walk most often. These adjustments don't make you old. They make you smart. Vision matters too. After 70, your eyes take longer to adjust to changes in light. Depth perception weakens. Glare becomes disorienting. If you haven't had your vision checked in the past year, do it now. Update your glasses. Make sure your prescription matches your current needs. And if you take medications that cause dizziness or drowsiness, talk to your doctor about timing and dosage. Sometimes a simple adjustment can make all the difference. Footwear is often overlooked, but it's critical. Shoes with worn soles, loose backs, or no support increase your risk dramatically. You don't need expensive shoes. You need stable ones. Shoes that grip. Shoes that stay on your feet. Shoes that don't slip when you walk on tile or wet pavement. And finally, hydration. Dehydration affects balance and cognition more than most people realize. After 70, your sense of thirst diminishes, so you may not feel thirsty even when your body needs water. Drink consistently throughout the day. Keep water nearby. And if you take diuretics, Work with your doctor to manage hydration carefully. None of these steps are complicated. None require drastic change. But together, they create a foundation of safety that allows you to keep living with confidence instead of caution. Knowledge doesn't have to lead to fear. It can lead to power. And the difference between the two is how you choose to respond. After 70, your body will change. That's not failure. That's life. But how you meet that change determines whether you spend your later years shrinking from risk or stepping forward with awareness. Living with awareness means you pay attention. You notice the signs. You adjust as needed. You don't ignore the wobble or the hesitation, but you also don't let them define you. You take practical steps. You strengthen what can be strengthened. You adapt what can be adapted. And you keep moving forward, not recklessly, but wisely. This is the balance aging requires, not denial, not surrender, but steady, informed engagement with the reality of your body. You can't stop time. You can't reverse every change. But you can meet this stage of life with dignity and preparation. You can choose to act before the risk becomes real. And that choice, made today, can protect the independence and peace you've worked a lifetime to build.